You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk, or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
Do you need a car? Been shopping only to be turned down because of bad credit, low credit, no credit, bankruptcy, or divorce? Guess what? Today's your lucky day, because now you can buy a car, truck, or SUV, just about any vehicle. It's true. Bad credit doesn't matter. No credit doesn't matter. Bankruptcy or divorce, it just doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, your job is your ticket to your new vehicle. We're Auto Credit Express, and we've helped thousands of people just like you. Antonio H. told us, great company, got me connected, and the day I went in, I drove off in the car I wanted. 100% worth your time. Need a car? Get started now and drive off as early as today. Just text FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911 right now to get started. That's FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911. Auto financing the easy way. Text FINANCE to 357-911.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your health care? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your health care, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your health care while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes Sometimes riders feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Lone Conservative. So, we have someone who I interviewed over spring break. Again, this is the first repeat guest I think we've ever had. Gabriella Hoffman. She's a writer at The Resurgent, and she's the host of the wonderful District of Conservation podcast. I recommend, as I did last episode, that you go and listen to it. I've kept up on it. It's a very good show. And one of the things that I like about Gabby, before we get into this, I got to brown nose her a little bit. One of the things that I really like about Gabby is she's one of the few people where I can just sit back and listen and learn a lot of new things that I don't have no idea about. I never knew before. So I love having her on the podcast. Gabriella, thank you so much for coming back.
I'm excited for round 2, Eric. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to come on fellow young conservative shows and really kind of pay it forward to the next generation, because so many people don't take the opportunity to come on growing venues like this. So I'm happy to come on and lend my expertise or my growing knowledge on certain topics that conservatives should care about. So thank you again for having me.
No problem. And again, thanks for coming on. But one of the things that I kind of just want to jump right into it today, because this is a topic I was really sad that we didn't get to discuss last episode.
I know, but we'll fix that today.
Oh no, I know. It's why I'm thrilled to have you on again, because I'm like I know it's like not, people call it zombie deer disease, but it's
right.
Not like a actual zombie kind of thing. But it's just, I'm intrigued by it. I've read a good deal about it, and I kind of wanted your expertise on the subject. So I guess the basic question that I'm going to ask is, should people be worried about zombie deer disease?
Sure. So that's what the media is calling it, but the proper terminology is chronic wasting disease. So this is something I've had to familiarize myself with too. I've done a little bit of deer hunting in my hunting journey, and I have not seen people get deer that are plagued by this disease. But for those in the western part of the United States and Midwest, this is a condition that is affecting cervid populations. So most hooved animals that are in the deer family, particularly mule deer, white-tailed deer. It goes a little bit into elk, not so much. It's more prevalent in white-tailed deer. But it's something to be alarmed about, not to panic. But the Centers for Disease Control obviously came out with a report not too long ago, like earlier this year, that said about half of the United States, it was 24 states in their last reporting, plus 2 Canada provinces were affected by this. And they specifically broke it down between 251 counties in various different states. I think I saw that in Virginia, we haven't had so many known cases. There have been a few cases, I think under 30 cases in the recent year. Maybe, I forget if it was total in perpetuity or if it was just in the last year. But more states across the country, obviously, given the CDC report, have shown that more deer are being plagued by this. And it's confounded people. It's scared people. It's caused the media to go kind of crazy in the reporting and talk about zombie deer, but deer cannot become zombies. That's just in the movies. If you see any like deer that become like vicious, that's usually the work of cinematographers. That's not how they typically behave. And this is interesting because it hasn't been known to affect humans quite yet. There's no real findings as to that. Some people say that it's very similar to Yakov-Kretsov's disease, which is mad cow disease, which put the whole world, especially the Western world, into a panic when mad cow disease was discovered and they had to recall a lot of beef. And a lot of people say that they're kind of in an unknown territory and that you shouldn't be worried about consumption of deer meat yet, if you especially do not test it, but you should always test it. And I'll discuss more about why it's important to test it. But for now, it doesn't affect humans, but people have to take a lot of precautions if they are consuming meat. And this has even gotten the attention of senators and congressmen. And back in February, Senator John Barraza was joined by Senators Doug Jones of Alabama and Michael Bennet of Colorado to introduce the Chronic Wasting Disease Transmitted in Cervidae Study Act. So there are bills, and there's a companion bill, H.R. 837. I'm not sure what movement has happened with them, but they would direct the Agriculture and Interior Secretaries to collaborate with the National Academy of Sciences to test, identify, and work with wildlife biologists and other experts to combat the transmission of the disease and reduce the infection rates and other sorts. So I can send you all those details later. But it's gotten the attention of Congress and other governmental partners. And basically what it is, it's a highly contagious neurological disease that affects, again, cervids. So most likely and mostly deer, elk, and moose. And what it does scientifically, because I had to research this and I wrote an article, and if you don't mind me reading from my article that I wrote on it, because they're my words, I'll defer people back to this piece. But I was able to break it down like this, that it's a spongy brain degeneration that is noticeable in these affected deer. And people in hunting and shooting sports have been sounding the alarm on CWD for a few years. But I think this CDC report has kind of awakened people to the reality that this is happening and that this can affect your deer hunting. It wouldn't deter people from deer hunting altogether, but it'll make people think, okay, maybe I need to do a better job of testing the meat I harvest and working better with my state wildlife agency. In Virginia, it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended that if you do hunt deer, even in Northern Virginia and Western Maryland area, they recommend that you test your deer, even though it's not compulsory, just for a precaution. And if your deer is found to be containing this, that you donate it to research and you do not ingest it. And again, as I mentioned, it's in the category, and this is probably very much over anyone's head who is not a scientist. It certainly was over my head when I was researching it, but it's, like I said, similar to mad cow disease, which is a transmissible spongiform encephalopathies type. So it seems like encephalitis because that affects people's neurological functions and things like encephalitis. So it really does impair people's cognitive abilities, and it's very deadly. But they said that people have cautioned observers not to lump these two together because, yet again, transmission to humans isn't conclusive as of this current time. But it has been known since the 1960s, believe it or not. I think it's more common in farm-raised deer, not wild deer, captive deer. And and other experts, including the CDC, have said that chronic wasting disease in free-ranging deer and elk is actually really low. So it was first identified, like I said, in the 1960s in Colorado for captive deer, and it didn't become traceable in wild deer until 1980. But if you're raising deer, you're more likely to see this, I think, rather than free-ranging deer. And it comes from an abnormal form of cellular protein that is commonly found in the central nervous system and in lymphoid tissue. And it converts normal cellular protein into an abnormal form. And what it does, how you can identify this, if you're a casual observer, if you go deer hunting, you'll notice deer who have this, if they're especially emaciated or very thin, they exhibit odd behavior, they have severe impairment of bodily functions, and ultimately, if they're dead and they look perfectly normal, or they die all of a sudden, usually sudden death is associated with this, and symptoms can take about a year to develop. And once a deer or elk or moose is stricken with this condition, it's usually not reversible. So that's why it's important to test any meat you harvest of a deer, or if you exhibit deer that, or if you see deer that exhibit these odd characteristic behaviors, it's important you talk to your wildlife agencies or your wildlife officers in making them aware of this, because it can become a very serious problem if it's not properly detected and identified. But there is a little bit of a fear associated with this condition. But again, it's not transmissible to humans as of this recording, and obviously as of right now. But people are really using it as a cautionary tale to be aware, to employ a lot of preventative measures, and to ensure that they don't ingest this, given the unfounded potential in humans. It's better to be safe than sorry is a good maxim.
Yeah, so I'm by no means an expert on this, but I've read somewhere that they found that it was transmittable to like human, like animals. Like I think they did experiments with like chimps or something, and they found that I may be wrong.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, from what I remember, they did some sort of experiment with an animal that shares a lot of the human DNA genome, and they found that the animal was able to get it. So that's why they're one of the reasons why there was a special, they were especially cautionary toward people to be careful with what they ate. Like I know North Carolina just recently, their state legislature passed, I don't know all the regulations, but they passed a bunch of regulations on deer meat coming from out of state.
Yes, I saw that.
Compare it.
Yeah.
So
there is a growing concern among state legislatures to prevent the transference of meat from out of state if you're hunting from out of state and you bring it in to North Carolina or other states that are not yet affected. As well, I have seen that report actually from North Carolina too. So a lot of state legislatures may make it incumbent upon themselves to employ certain measures to prevent meat from being brought into states that are not yet impacted by CWD, but a good resource for people who want to know about this from a really non-biased source. It's all science-based, and especially if it relates to hunting. A good website, it's a coalition of various different deer conglomerations and hunting groups and other wildlife interested groups that really do care about this. And a good website to check is cwd-info.org. And that's a really easy website to look and navigate. It talks about what it is, how to learn about it, how to identify it, what are the neurological symptoms, what is the physiological makeup of it, and how you can identify it in that respect if you have a science background or if you're just curious about how it materializes and forms. This is a really handy website. It'll break down any confusion you have about it, and it'll kind of calm your nerves if you read all those reports about the CDC report that came out not too long ago.
Yeah, I feel people are being really catastrophic. And by the way, I'm a germaphobe, right? When I first saw zombie deer disease, before I read more into it, I'm like, okay, I'm getting ready for a 28 days situation here.
You'll be fine.
It's good to know that there's been no cases found in people yet. I would caution, like I think everyone else is, that people just be careful with what they eat.
Just see your local regulations. Talk to your wildlife officers, talk to your agency, see if it's anywhere, if it's been identified. You can find reports. Just be alert, be aware, and if you're questioning certain deer meat or cervid meat, just talk to someone, get it tested, and if you find it to be infected with it, just donate it for research because it'll come in handy for that.
So one of the things that I actually found kind of creepy about this whole thing, though, was that since the incubation period for the disease is about a year,
yes,
you normally probably wouldn't be able to tell until the disease actually takes hold after that year. So assuming, let's say you kill a deer with the disease and it's the disease, the incubation period isn't up yet, so the deer kind of seems normal. Is there any way to tell after you kill it before the incubation period's up that it possibly has this disease?
That I do not know. I'm not an expert in this, so I will defer it to the experts.
Yeah.
But again, go to this website, and they are making themselves available to people who are interested, and you can, I think, send them an inquiry about that, about incubation period and if it's exceeding it or not exceeding it. So I think I'll defer to them because I don't think I can adequately answer that since I'm not a researcher in that field.
Wow, Gabby, why are you even here?
No, we can talk about it in generalities, but I don't know I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't want to give a wrong answer either. But I think that, but I think that website is probably your best resource right now for any questions as it relates to incubation. Did it exceed it? Did it not exceed it? I think they're the better equipped people to address that. But it's good we talked about it in general.
No, I think it is too. Like I said, I've seen a lot of people getting unnecessary because there's not enough information out yet to get actually scared. I think there's enough to be concerned, but not outright scared that the world's going to end. And there are some people I've talked to that they don't follow the news very closely. They read an article every now and then, and they see the name zombie deer disease in the headlines, and they don't read more into it. And they're like, well, Here comes the end.
I mean, they do this for.
I'm glad we.
Yeah, they do this for every topic, sadly. And I think you have a few more lined up related to wildlife that we'll talk about: sensationalism or mislabeling or not being very nuanced in terms of that reporting. But you see this with any type of topic, that it's more convenient to scare people with a headline, and then there's no emphasis on the content of the article. And that just really puts people in a frantic mode. They get scared. They're unsure. They think they have to stop living. They have to stop doing basic functions or doing their day-to-day routine. And I think that's part of the media sensationalism that we see. And we don't see them admit fault for any misreporting or misgivings that they do. I mean, with this whole Russia collusion thing, which I'm so glad is over, because as someone who is one of perhaps the most outspoken Kremlin critics in conservative politics, I think this takes away from actual criticism of it. Russia has been trying to meddle in U.S. elections for at least 100 years, just given how tricky and maniacal they are. This is not a conspiracy. They tried to do this in FDR's administration and other various different administrations. And it's just good that there's some clarity, but people will not accept the facts because it's inconvenient for their narrative. And over the years, like with certain things, when I've realized that certain things come out and different revelations come out, I'm like, okay, I'm going to accept the findings, or I'm going to accept the electoral outcomes, even if I don't like them. I've had to do that in Virginia a lot lately. So I think these people have to do that for that particular story, or any other story where the findings are conclusive, they're palpable, and you just have to come to grips. You may not agree with the findings, but you have to say, okay, this is the reality and we need to move on. And that's kind of what it is with any wildlife stories too, I think.
Well, I mean, just speaking on Russia for a few seconds, I'm wondering how the media and how the people who were saying, because here's the thing, and I argued with one of my liberal friends about this the other day. I'm kind of all over the place. I had like double shot espresso. I'm hype. But one of the things that I'm wondering is how all of the people who were Trump committed treason. Trump is a traitor to his country. Trump colluded undeniably with the Russians and should be impeached. I'm wondering how I've seen them kind of try to justify themselves on social media and on the news about how, well, we were just being properly skeptical and blah, 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 blah. We were doing good reportings. We were waiting for the facts to come out. It's like, no, you weren't. You were saying he was committing treason. You were saying that he was colluding with a foreign government. It's like, listen, I think Trump has a lot of slimy things going on with his personality. I'm not the biggest fan of Trump personally, as many of the listeners of this podcast know. But I don't think, number one, I don't think he colluded with the Russians. And number two, I don't think he'd be dumb enough, as much as people like to insult his intelligence, I don't think he'd be dumb enough to collude with the Russians. So I'm just wondering how a lot of these media types and a lot of the people the grifters, I'll just call them grifters,
yeah,
like who made their name on calling him a treasonous cur, are going to react now that basically this claim has been demolished.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had no idea who the hell those brothers were. Like, they're so obscure. I think they're still even obscure today, but they are like so desperate for attention, for example, and they like respond to every tweet Trump puts out thinking he's going to pay attention and give them a care. He doesn't care about what these people think. And a lot of people made this their cause célèbre. Like, okay, we're going to bring down a duly elected president. And I think it's just an extension of people being just unsettled by the fact that he was voted in without any help from Russia or any other type of entity. They're just perplexed that people would vote for him. And over the years, I've understood why my parents voted for him. I've had friends vote for him. And I certainly will vote for him in 2020, even if I have some reservations about certain things of his personality. But I think most of his policy positions, I'm mostly in agreement with. I'm not going to worship him at the altar. Everyone's fallible and makes mistakes. But I think he has proven that even if he's not conservative himself, he has enacted a pretty conservative agenda compared to a lot of his predecessors post-Reagan. And it's just, again, to distract from really meaningful things that his administration is doing. Or if people want to criticize him, it distracts from intelligible debates you can have about his doings for bills or laws or things of that sort. But it just ate away 2 years at his administration. And I don't think any sitting president, even if a Democrat was kind of dragged into this too for unfair reasons, I don't think we'd want to see this either. But the other side wouldn't hold that to that same standard. They only want to have standards for themselves and not for the others, as we've seen for many different things when it comes to racism here in Virginia or elsewhere. And it's just sad that people are so juiced up and polarized and distracted by these different things about removing a sitting president because they don't like him and thinking he's a Russian stooge. Like I made this joke to my parents, and we always talk about this because I still am lucky to have my parents around. And since they fled the Soviet Union and all that, they're still young enough to be around, which is good. And I'm grateful they're still here. But I joke with them. I said, it would be collusion if Putin jumped out of the voting box and coerced you into voting for him, which is physically impossible because you can't have people jumping out of these electronic voting machines. But it just screams of lunacy, because if you look at the actions of the Trump administration, I've tried my best to follow kind of Russo-American relations post-Soviet, because their policies affected a lot of my family prior to my birth, prior to my coming into this world. And I just like to examine what happens there because it's important to know. And Romney was right. It is the biggest geopolitical foe, and he was mocked for that. And people jumped on to the cause against the Kremlin a little too late and opportunistically. But if you just kind of look at what administrations tend to be friendlier with the Kremlin, they tend to be Democrat administrations. And Obama's administration recently, it was just the 10 years since Hillary Clinton gave them the reset button, which actually translated to overcharge instead of recharge. And that's pretty ironic because they certainly did allow them to recharge and gave them the license to double up on their arms deals with the START II treaty, which is something that I don't know if many of your listeners are familiar with, but if you Google START II treaty, there's a great paper from Heritage Foundation that explains the problems with that deal. That was either in 2010 or 2011. Then you had Obama make the comment to then President Dmitry Medvedev, who is now prime minister, but he's mostly just like a puppet for Putin. He has no real role in the Kremlin, but he's kind of like a figurehead, whatever, a placeholder. But he told him in 2012, as everyone remembers, that he will have more flexibility after he wins the election. I don't know how he knew he was going to be more flexible after the election. That's pretty suspect, but I'll leave that to interpretation. But he talked about giving them more license to do this and that. And they did nothing when Russia annexed Crimea. They were just like, okay, we'll just brush this off because like it's their country. They didn't really do anything with respect to that. And I think Trump's administration, just having seen what his people have done, they've put more sanctions onto Russia. We've kicked out more diplomats who are tied to Russia from embassies or from consulates in San Francisco, New York, and elsewhere. They've been pretty critical about them trying to annex former Soviet-occupied territories. Trump has strengthened relations with the Baltics, especially my ancestral homeland of Lithuania. They've worked with him to cooperate and pay more into defense spending through GDP, which a minimum threshold was set for 2%, but all the Baltics and a few other countries like Poland and such pledged to pay over 2%, which is great. So they don't have to rely on us, but they're going to build up more of their defenses. But this administration has shown a dedication to repairing relations in Eastern Europe, especially in Hungary and Czech Republic and other places. And Poland, I think Poland's government likes the fact that there is someone who doesn't call things inaccurately by calling, let's say, Auschwitz and other crazy death camps and other Holocaust concentration camps, Polish concentration camps. It was Nazi-occupied concentration camps in Poland because Poland itself was not an autonomous country. It was illegally occupied, much like most of Eastern Europe. So I think countries with a sordid history or who had dual occupation zones under both the Nazis and then later the Soviets are grateful that there is an administration that is not only trying to repair relations and see them flourish because they're a lot more free market in their thinking. They want to trade with the U.S. They want to work with the U.S. more and cooperate. But also a lot of these countries that had dealt with both National Socialism and Soviet communism are really glad to see that a president tackles and identifies and dissects the problem with socialism. And it's just, to call him a Russian spy is just so out of character and so inaccurate. Every person running for office, whether they've been the Democrat or Republican nominee, deals with people, not so much wheeling and dealing, with deals in hotels, etc. But everyone deals with Kremlin people, with Chinese government officials, with South American officials. And if nothing happened, no deals happened, and people were just talking, or they're talking about cooperating if they were to win, that's not collusion. That's just the nature of how politics is. I don't like it, but if there was no exchange of something, nothing happened, and there were just talks, it's a nothing burger, essentially. And it takes away, again, from true criticism of the Kremlin and their human rights abuses. So that's kind of my thoughts on all things Russia.
Well, the disturbing thing to me, and then we can move on to trophy hunting,
Sure.
which is something that I've wanted to talk to you about. But the disturbing thing to me about this whole chapter in American politics is I understand, because I argued with one of my liberal friends the other day. I understand that there were people out there who are disappointed about how this whole Mueller thing turned out, because they genuinely thought Trump was guilty and they think he's escaping the arm of the law. But I think there's a huge faction. I don't know what sort of percentage this would be, whether it's a majority or not, but there's this huge faction among the left that I feel not only thinks that Trump is guilty, but they want him to be guilty so they can kick this guy out of office.
Yeah.
So they don't have to admit that they were wrong, and so they can say, "Oh yeah, see, we were right about him all along." It's really disturbing to me that anyone would want the president to be guilty of colluding with Russia, that would want the president to be guilty of what they would consider treason.
That's how
it's just disturbing.
Yeah, that's how sadly the modern Democrat Party operates now. It's a victory. They're out for blood, and they're not wanting to work with Republicans. As you saw, I think this is a new development. I saw this and I was a little bit perplexed by this. I'm glad we don't have this in Republican primaries yet. But the DCCC, which is like the congressional outfit, said that if any incumbent were to be challenged, we will not allot any resources to a competitor in the Democrat primary. And that is pretty problematic when it comes to free association and things. And I understand perhaps they can set the parameters if they're a private organization, which I believe they are, but it kind of goes against the very pretext of running for office and affording people choices. So they don't want to have their people challenged by someone who could be more centrist, I think, just because they want to show unison. And then you had Ocasio-Cortez say that she will work to ensure any Democrat who works with Republicans is roundly defeated. And again, they don't want deviation. They want everyone to go into this leftward shift of the party, although I think they've been more extreme for many years. They're just now openly admitting it. I think whatever moderate tinges of that party are fully gone. I don't know when the last semblance of them were, maybe with the Blue Dog Democrats of 2010. And they are no longer in office and they're not getting elected in state legislatures or Congress or Senate. But whatever remnants of moderate Democrats is, I think it's very, very much slim pickings, or a very slim minority, or they're on the verge of extinction themselves, or they're already extinct. I think that's something to say. But they operate in you have to defeat your political opponents and defeat them. No chance of being friends with them. They're evil. It's kind of how we hear this dichotomy of they're evil, we're good. We keep hearing this dichotomy, and I don't view that in terms of people who differ from me politically. I have friends of different political beliefs. I'm proudly conservative Republican, but I don't view people who differ from me unless they're communists as evil people I need to defeat or that have to be demolished or done away with. I think conservatives differ because we want to battle it out on the battleground of ideas. We don't want to eliminate people from their very existence politically or damage their careers unless if it's to expose corruption. But their thinking now is you have to defeat them. You can't be one with them or you can't work with them, despite them claiming we want bipartisanship, we want this. I think that party is just tilted so far left that if you don't lockstep vote or goose step vote or behave in the fashion that party leadership or these new so-called party leaders want you to behave, you're going to be eliminated politically. And that's a problem. If we saw this in Republican circles, I think that would be a pretty alarming thing. I know that the RNC has taken steps to ensure that Trump doesn't get a primary challenger, which I think can be done because he enjoys a lot of high popularity among Republicans. That's what a lot of polling shows. I think they're still going to allow for competitors, but more than enough, he's going to get overwhelming support for re-election. But you don't see Republicans taking these kinds of steps so much, which is good for now. Let's hope they never do. But that's problematic that the DCC is doing that. And I think that's cause for concern if you're a Democrat.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons the DCC may have done that, and it's wrong either way. I think if people want to elect someone, they should be able to elect them. But one of the reasons the DCC may have done that is because this new freshman class in Congress has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
For the DNC and for senior Democrats. Like it's basically been leaked that Nancy Pelosi, despite her kind of neutral appearance to the public, has not been thrilled with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has not been thrilled with Ilhan Omar, has not been thrilled with a lot of the freshman congresswomen who are kind of in, and congressmen who are kind of in that new contingent that we're seeing build in the House of Representatives. So it could be a tactic to try and preserve the old guard of the Democratic Party, because there's this new wave of millennial voters coming in that could possibly turn the tides of I mean, it's already been happening slow. I think it's been happening more rapidly over the past 2 years, but it was already kind of happening slowly, but that could finally turn the tide of what the Democratic Party represents in totality.
Yeah, I think if they continue doing what they're doing, and I'm not saying this because I'm secretly gloating, I kind of enjoy the fact that they're shooting themselves in the foot with their embrace of socialism and all these radical positions. But even from a casual observer standpoint, just the fact that they're shifting and in pushing these extreme positions, this is a huge opportunity for Republicans to finally define themselves and to tell their story better. And if they don't seize upon this and offer the counter narrative and offer a winning solution and winning platform, then you're going to see the shift to more extreme policies. But I think it's a good occasion for Republicans and even centrists in both parties or whatever to seriously think about the future of this country politically and what could happen if these extreme ideas were to materialize. Again, it's feeding into they have it right in their palm to take it and to win and to really push a bold agenda and get more people who aren't traditionally Republican or conservative to vote for them, because people want to keep more of their earnings. They want to pay lower taxes. They want to see the deficit reduced. They want to protect their Second Amendment. They want to see a free market or limited government and environmental agenda that doesn't take away from their livelihood. So I think and people also don't support late-term abortion or post-birth abortion either, or infanticide, I should say. So people are looking for a political home, and Republicans just have to be better adjusted to it, because I feel like a lot of people are going to be more alienated by the Democrat Party and its current standing.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm kind of in between on whether them embracing socialism is a death toll for the Democratic Party or whether it's some sort of era of political dominance for them. I'm kind of just in between on that, because
some have compared it to the Tea Party movement, and I don't really see that. Because most of the people who were elected, let's say this last cycle, tended to be more moderate Democrats in a lot of swing Republican districts, not far left people. There were a few that came through the cracks, of course, but overwhelmingly they were not elected. It was the moderate Democrats. And there was a really good piece in National Journal talking about this, saying that a lot of the extreme elements of the new crop of Democrat congressmen get a lot of the attention, but majority of them come from red districts and they tend to be more Democrat or moderate in nature and their voting habits. And the Tea Party was very different, where you had more conservative members of Congress elected in Republican circles. You didn't see moderates. There was no effort among moderates that were elected. A lot of moderates were booted out. I don't see the comparison between the two. Maybe they're having their sort of movement to define themselves going forward, but perhaps in foundation, it seems very similar, but in terms of output, no. You see a more conservative wing of Democrats that were elected, numerically speaking, this last election cycle, not so much more extreme, but I wouldn't call Tea Party conservatives extreme. That's how the media portrayed them to be. But you see definitely a lot more extreme elements of Democrat Party especially in some new members, get a lot of attention, define the media landscape, etc. But again, I think a lot of people have warned that if they don't have more moderate members elected in swing districts or in traditionally Democrat districts, that they're going to not be palatable to American voters going forward.
And I would compare it to the Tea Party in the sense that it's like you said, the Tea Party wasn't extreme. It was just
principled conservatism.
It was more, it was principled conservatism. It was a principled conservative movement. And while the Tea Party saw more immediate success, the reason I'm not very apt on saying that the Democratic Party's move towards socialism is going to be their downfall is because it all depends on how the culture shifts. So you see among younger generations that the culture has shifted radically to the left. I mean, even more so than younger generations and younger generations past. It's a rather disturbing and honestly kind of unique trend, because young people do tend to be more to the left.
Right.
But to see young people who are this far to the left is extremely unique for America.
And also
right
scary. I will admit that.
Yeah. No.
And maybe for me, because I must be an oddball, because I don't know how big of a contingent in politics kids of people who fled socialism are. They tend to vote Republican, but you see second and third generation, and even some first generation like me, tend to gravitate to the left, not exclusively, but you see a lot of kids whose parents really did have a horrible experience, or their grandparents. They tend to vote Republican just because they're like, it's the party that's against socialism and communism. So we find a natural home there. But the more a generation gets settled in American ways, the more they go through public schooling, influenced by entertainment, etc. You see even kids of those who fled socialism tend to start inclining themselves to Democrat politics because maybe the parents are not comfortable talking about what happened in their homelands. Perhaps they have no interest in talking about that, or the kids are just like, like the socialism is different, or like these ideas are a little different than what you went through, and the parents can't protest them and they don't want to make them unhappy or lose relationships with their kids. So it's an interesting dynamic in terms of that. But I'm one of the perhaps unusual first generation Americans because my parents are zero generation. They came here. They're the immigrants. I was born here. So I'm a first generation. I think people confuse what the heck first generation, second generation, et cetera is, but that's what it is. But I'm unusual in that myself and a handful of others, I have some other friends who are in the similar boat like me, or they came here directly as zero generation immigrants themselves. But there are a few of us who are in conservative politics who are like, our parents went through this. It had disastrous circumstances and outcomes. Why are people embracing this? We saw what had happened to our family through pictures and stories and survivor testimonials, and we know this doesn't work. And other people who may have similar backgrounds, and they're smaller, like I said, in numbers, but there sadly is a growing number of kids from those backgrounds who tend to now vote Democrat. You'll see that, unfortunately. But if you didn't really have your family experience that, and I know there are a lot of more young people who are like, we see because we're told this, that socialism is bad or socialism sucks. We know it sucks, but then they don't know exactly why. They understand a little bit topically, but they don't really cite people who fled it. They don't really use their stories much. They say, well, I know how bad it is because I was told this, and I want to see more human interest stories of my parents, other survivors out there. I think that's a good way how you can turn the tide on socialism. But yeah, but it's, I'm not surprised to see our generation. And I think, did you see that Time magazine interview with the one reporter who claimed that she grew up with Dunkaroos, or I'm sorry, that Ocasio-Cortez grew up with Dunkaroos? I didn't know what Dunkaroos are. Maybe it's a East Coast thing. I grew up on the West Coast, so I don't know what Dunkaroos are. And then I think this reporter said she grew up with fruit rolls, and that their generation will never see prosperity. And I'm like a year or two behind these girls. I'm just turned 28. I'm not too far removed from them. I'm in the same generation. And I'm like, you guys have enjoyed prosperity that your parents and your grandparents built for this country. And the reporter, it's really tone deaf of her to say that she's never enjoyed prosperity, because I believe one parent of hers worked for Newsweek and the other was a producer for The Daily Show or some Comedy Central show. I'm like, you've lived with so much privilege, and you wouldn't have gotten your time position if it weren't for your wealthy parents who are privileged as well. And not that it's a bad thing to come from privilege, But she's so tone deaf talking about, I didn't experience any prosperity. She wouldn't have what she has if it weren't for her parents. So the reason why young people are embracing it is because they don't know how good they have it. And they're really ungrateful for the fruits of free enterprise, or the semblance of free enterprise we have here in this country. And they think, woe is me. I'm so woke. Like, I have my Starbucks and then I have this, and I'm like so conscious culturally, and I have this, and we need this system here because it's going to be more equitable and fair. And they can say this in this country because we have freedoms, and you can have the freedom to be very misguided in believing in socialism is the answer. But again, if they were to really familiarize themselves with those circumstances and not be cushioned, because you can call for socialism with an iPhone, with all these luxuries that are afforded to you, and think you're going to be absolved from it or exempt from it. But when you actually go to those countries, you see people who get detained in third world countries or North Korea and other different countries. And if they're lucky to survive, they come back home kissing the ground saying, I will never embrace this kind of system again, ever again. But Venezuela is not contextualized for them much. They think, oh, it's just, just an outlier. And like we like Maduro, like we see with protests.
You know what the Socialist Party calls Venezuela, right? They call it statist capitalism.
Oh my God, that's an oxymoron. You can't have that. There's corporatism and there's crony capitalism, but no way, because they've taken over the means of production in that country. People have to submit themselves to bread rations, and they have to eat flamingos, and their healthcare is really subpar. No, it's not, no semblance of free enterprise. Like some Scandinavian countries or some other Western type societies, which have flirtations with free enterprise and also not central planning, but state involvement. No. They keep calling it this. And I think, what is it? That socialist Twitter account from Britain, that's the one who keeps saying, don't listen to them because they.
Oh, well, not them. I think they're the official. I think they are the official Socialist Party of America.
Oh, the American equivalent. Oh, I was thinking there's that official Socialist Party of UK or England. There's that account that always says, no, this is state-sanctioned socialism. This is not the real socialism that's equitable, fair, and cuddly, and unicorns, and lollipops, and rainbows, which will never be materialized or ever happen, because you don't get rainbows, unicorns, and lollipops. You get imprisonment, you get sawdust type of bread, food rations, and people will spy on you and report you and snitch you out. It's not a beautiful system that everyone keeps portraying it to be. And I hope we never have to endure that system here for people to realize how bad it is. But people just have to, maybe it is putting a fear in God in them in terms of scaring them out of socialism to make them realize how bad it is, or doing, I don't know, like an immersion thing. Like, how people do reenactments for historical events, but maybe you have to do like a reenactment for people, no killing, no violence, of course, but show like what it is, like a reenactment of how those societies are, like guards that bully and terrify people and harm them physically, but you don't have to show the actual physical stuff, or putting in documentaries. And unfortunately, a lot of these documentaries and other evidences are not accessible, or they're suppressed because the Soviet Union destroyed a lot of its evidence. Conveniently, of course, that's what they typically do. But there should be some documentaries, and I have seen some documentaries and footage, at least pictures, showing how horrific all these societies are when they flirt with socialism. And it's there, and it's not doctored, it's not made up, it's not a lie by Khrushchev or by American people. There's a lot of evidence pointing to not just how bad National Socialism under the Nazi Germany regime was, but also the equivalent in Eastern Europe, then China, then Vietnam and Cambodia and Cuba too. There are a lot of case studies and examples and evidence out there. Sadly, a lot of it is missing, but likely could be found if people did a good job of digging it out and unearthing it. But I think it's just a matter of doing some reenactments or finding footage showcasing how bad it is and really just scaring people out of it.
I remember when I was in elementary school in Pittsburgh, we did this week where it was kind of, we relived what it would be like if we were in a segregated school system, where like one day you'd get a blue card. And if you were a blue card, you'd basically be like the white students. And if you got a red card, you'd be like the black students. And the red card people had to use this really gross water fountain. It wasn't actually unsanitary, but they put a lot of stuff on it to make it look gross. They made you use the really gross bathrooms. They made you sit, I forget where, they made you basically sit in dingier classrooms. And then if you had the blue card, you had all of the best luxuries. You had the best lunch. You had the best water fountains. So it was enlightening. And it was something that helped teach me why, I mean, not just that segregation as a concept is evil and that America, it was a horrible, awful time in American history, but it helped you experience to some minor degree what, as a child, what it was like. I think those things could be something like that. Could be extremely useful.
Yeah, I mean, not actually carrying out or implementing the policies they did, but
no, you don't shoot a kid in the head.
No, definitely not. No violence. But you can have reenactments. Like, I found a lot of reenactments, like, for various California history things. Like, we would see things like you'd go see what the gold rush is like, or you could see what a village is like under social. I don't know. Like, I feel like people could be creative enough. And then you couple that with testimonials from those survivors that are still around, extrapolate and find footage, documentary footage to perhaps restore and remaster and put out there as a documentary. I know people are, what was it? The guy who directed Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson, he just restored that World War I era documentary. So, like, I feel like people, if they're creative enough and they are beholden to the truth and want to tell stories, they can find whatever remaining documentary evidence there is from these horrible regimes and really just create something and input testimonials of survivors. And I know History Channel does this well. They do some reenactments, and they've had some series about, like, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Vilnius Ghetto Uprising, and other different historical events you don't hear about often. And sometimes it's questionable how truthful it is, but lately they've been putting up better, more truthful content out there. But
not Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, no. This was about, like, like I said, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it had some people, survivors from Israel and other countries now. They're older, and they still remember. Some were not comfortable going into detail about those experiences. But again, I think reenactments, an emphasis on countering historical revisionism, talking to the survivors if they're still around, and having documentaries and going to the places where this is sacred, hollow ground, and not going to Auschwitz and taking pictures on the railroad tracks as what people are doing, but going to these places and talking to the experts and historians who could tell you this is what happens if you don't remember the history, or if you are doomed to repeat the mistakes of history. You can go to various different museums in Eastern Europe. Lithuania has plenty of museums talking about the Nazi occupation there, and also Soviet occupation and the ramifications those occupation periods had. You can go to Checkpoint Charlie in the Czech Republic. You can go to Berlin in Germany and see about how that city was divided into two separate spheres in West Germany and East Germany, and talk to the people who remember vividly what it was to live in a divided city with two different spheres of occupation, or one sphere of occupation, the other that was not so much occupied, I would think. But there's so much that can be done. It cannot be solved in a podcast. And I think all of us have to put our heads together. My goal is to educate people on the ills of socialism, especially our generation. I have a few projects coming up. I don't want to reveal exactly what, but my goal for now is at least just continue reporting, interviewing people with human interest stories, talking to survivors, and then trying to redeem and better placate and prop up the successes of free enterprise and the Western way of life, arguably, too. And how that's why people come here. They're not coming here for more socialism. They're coming here to enjoy a semblance of free enterprise, to work towards the American dream. Even in as muddled and as complicated this country is, people still come here because they know they have freedoms here. So it's just doing a better job of highlighting why people come here, why socialism is bad, but also countering it, not just saying being negative, but also proposing solutions for why people should not embrace it, and then embrace the alternatives and better appreciate the systems that prevent socialism from happening.
And then before we move on to kind of the final topic of the show today, the last thing that I wanted to say on this topic was the reason why I'm skeptical of calling the embrasure of socialism that we're seeing in the Democratic Party its death blow is because a few things are happening. One, I think there could be a possible long haul strategy with all these freshman Congress women and men coming in, where the younger generations, as the older generations begin to, as all humans do, die off, and the younger generations start to take over. It worries me that the progression is of as like these millennials and the Gen Z people have kids, that their kids will also grow up way radical left wing. So I'm not. That's why I'm not entirely willing to say that. Listen, socialism is the death of the Democratic Party. And the other thing that concerns me is even people in the older generation. It's scary that it's feasible that Bernie Sanders could, there's been a ton of polling done, and I do overall trust polls. If you put Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump in a general election right now, voting happened today, there's a strong chance he wins. Oof. That's something that's concerning because people are so angry. People are so angry about Trump, even the older people, that they'd be willing to vote for someone like Bernie. So that's just one of the things that I wanted to say before we move on. Anger can also make people do stupid things. But the last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and it's something that I wanted to talk about last episode, and
we'll get into it.
I was really sad, is trophy hunting. I feel trophy hunting has a lot of misconceptions around. Obviously, there's bad people, but I feel trophy hunting has a lot of misconceptions around it, just like sweatshops do. And we were talking about this before the podcast, where the term sweatshops, you'll often think of oppressing conditions and evil capitalism and colonialism, where in reality, a lot of the sweatshops that are provided in these various developing countries are actually better opportunities than a lot of the people would normally see in their hometowns or in their cities. So sweatshops are a really unnaturally stigmatized term, when in reality, these companies are providing better opportunity than a lot of these people would usually see. I feel trophy hunting is the same thing. Trophy hunting has that natural bad stigma attached to it, where it provides a lot of good, and it's not the awful thing wholesale that people like to imagine it is. So, I mean, if you could go into trophy hunting a little bit and describe what the good, the bad, and what people get wrong about it is, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not going to debate the merits of sweatshops, but I understand the comparison you're trying to make. But with respect to this type of hunting, the controversial big game hunting, and I want to make a few distinctions with respect to trophy hunting. It goes by different names. You can call it trophy hunting, but the proper terminology, from what more expert and seasoned hunters have told me, is to refer to this as big game hunting. And there's different kinds of categories of hunting. There's small game hunting, there's predator hunting, and then you have big game hunting or trophy hunting. In the hunting realm, a trophy is a very subjective harvest. It could be something as small game. It could be a squirrel if you're out squirrel hunting. It could be waterfowl if you harvested an elusive wood duck or something rare or unique like that. It could be a 6-point buck. It could be a nice tom turkey. It could be trapping for beavers, whatever. It could also be elk. It could be moose. It could be a black bear or grizzly bear. Oh, here in the United States. And then abroad, you can think of it as a red stag, different types of mountain goats. And then if you go to Africa, that's where it gets really contentious, is if people participate in the culling of elephants, lions, tigers, and other species that are more endangered, but do require some sort of management from there. And once you kind of understand the dynamics and the different caveats associated with these different levels of hunting, and you break it down and you kind of go to the basics and understand that there's a lot of nuance associated with those various terms and how they're applied and what laws and rules go into place. And I think a lot of people also, in addition to not understanding how subjective the term trophy is, they like to easily conflate a law-abiding hunter, even a big game hunter who harvests an elephant or a rhino or a trophy as part of a culling management program in Africa or some other foreign country, and they're partaking in the system there. With trophy hunting, hold on, I lost my train of thought. One sec. Okay, so with trophy hunting, and you can edit up that little gap period. But with trophy hunting, with conflation of law-abiding with not law-abiding. Okay, so trophy hunting, you have to understand how subjective of a term it is, but you also have to not fall into the trap of labeling every person who gets a trophy as a trophy hunter, or lumping them in with the same category as a poacher. And a lot of people like to conflate trophy hunters or big game hunters with poachers, and that is a very serious mistake to do. Even if you don't like the means from which someone does culling of these big five species or these more endangered or more Disneyfied creatures, it would be terrible to lump them in the same category as a poacher. And as controversial as it is, I personally don't see myself going to Africa and hunting one of the big five game species. I understand the merits to it and support a managed system in place to see those monies go back to conservation and then to see a regeneration of those species there, because it's not just about taking out an older elephant that could be dangerous to a village. Those funds, and it's not an inexpensive hunt. These hunts are very expensive. They're done in a smaller distribution. Not many people can afford or do these, and most people don't typically hunt these types of species. But it would be more preferential and more preferable to see the culling of these species in question in smaller amounts, to later then see the regeneration of these species from these monies that are accrued and obtained from American or European hunters, to see the species benefit as a whole later on, rather than seeing them wiped out and decimated by poachers who are never held to account and can never be accountable unless they're caught. So I'd rather see trophy big game hunters helping to manage populations, working with stakeholders and the governments in Africa to manage these herds, even controversial big game species, in smaller doses than to see a whole species wiped out. And there are other ways to also see conservation come about from these more contentious species. Last week for my podcast, I had Nathan Edmondson from the Eco Defense Group come on, and they talked about ways that they work with governmental agencies or locals and others to not impose a neo-colonialist view. And hunters who partake in culling management systems in Africa believe that a lot of people from the Western world, anti-hunters and others, will come in with neo-colonialist ambitions and dictate to them, to those in Africa and other countries, this is how you have to do it. And you talk to people in the ground, a lot of the times they hate that. Whether it's you hear people from, let's say, Eco Defense Group talk about this, or even private reserves where these types of hunting systems happen and occur. You'll find agreement even among those types of groups that neocolonialism is something that the locals reject, and that they would not appreciate people, especially anti-hunters or some in the Democrat Party, trying to impose their will onto people there in that continent. And Eco Defense Groups tries to work with locals to ensure that a lot of the young kids don't get into poaching. A lot of people want to see the training of rangers to help protect species, both in the preserves and groups like Eco Defense, to ensure that they have an equal footing and equal ability to fend off armed poachers when they have a small but powerful, highly specialized, not corrupt ranger force in place to help protect species and protect villagers as well. And there's just so much that can be done. I think the trophy documentary that CNN, believe it or not, obtained rights to, did a pretty decent job of showcasing all those dynamics about how poachers, not big game hunters, are the bigger threat to the livelihood of endangered species. And I fully agree with that assessment. And again, the so-called trophy hunting isn't perfect, but I'd rather it be revised and revamped and better executed and done in the right way, rather than seeing poachers decimate and obliterate a whole species. So it's a little muddled, it's a little unconventional, but even here in the United States with the North American model, I fully endorse the managed hunts of grizzly bears, of other species that are apex predators too. And it doesn't mean, again, you call for a wipeout of that species. It just means you have a better management system in place. In the case of the grizzly bear in Yellowstone, Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, there was a controversial hunt that the federal judge in Montana unfortunately stalled against the wishes of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho's wildlife agencies and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And if this hunt were to have taken place, what it would have done is only allowed up to 23 grizzly bears to be harvested, if you're lucky to harvest them. The other caveat to this hunt was people had to read the fine details and see that it's not as controversial as believed. If 2 female bears or 2 sows, grizzly sows, had been harvested, the hunt would have been finished before that 23 bear harvest number cap would have been achieved. So people have to read between the lines first, see that this is pushed by wildlife biologists because It's true and tried scientific measures. They're going along the lines of biology and wildlife biology and conservation standards in place. They're not just proposing these managed hunt systems here and also abroad because they're doing it on a whim, or they want to kill as many things as possible. It's rooted in science. They figured out a certain number needs to be properly managed in order for the species to be healthy, and for ungulate species or species on the lower totem pole of the ecosystem to be flourishing and to thrive. Because if you have too much of a species, if it's not properly managed, the ecosystem will be out of balance. And this is something scientists say. I'm just simply regurgitating the knowledge that I've been able to accrue and learn about and implement into my writings and my musings and my consulting work. I take what they say at face value, and I try to learn, and I try to extrapolate that information and translate it to people in layman's terms for them to understand. And there are plenty of others like me who are doing this. We're a small but growing number. But you have to read between the details. You have to see, and you have to understand, what are other existential threats. Would you rather see poachers completely wipe out this, or would you rather see the careful attention and management of a species, even if it is somewhat controversial on the surface, but it's legal and law-abiding and not unethical if it's done right? You have to pick sometimes between the lesser of two evils, and I would rather law-abiding managed hunts take place over poaching, because poaching does happen in North America too, even though we have laws where people are supposed to abide by hunting limits and restrictions. They have to know when season is. They have to know if the species is endangered. They have to know if it's ethical to hunt them and when it's ethical to hunt them, or whether it's not ethical to hunt them too. And the same can be applied to hunting abroad as well. And I think people just read a headline, they make assumptions, and they're out for the blood of a so-called trophy hunter. That happens here in North America too. And I think we can easily repel that. And I think people do when they say, look at the finer details. This is not as controversial as you believe. You may not like this, but it's a lot more preferential and a lot more preferred than seeing a complete extinction of a species. So people have to think in those terms. They have to have a more nuanced approach to their train of thought, and they have to not be influenced by Disney, as we last talked about.
Yeah, and when you hear trophy hunting, I feel that people are often, and I'm glad you stated this misconception.
Yes.
People often think of African trophy hunting, when in reality, and obviously I think African trophy hunting is more of a gray area, because there's points where it's very well regulated, and then there's places where it's pretty much free range. Like it would be considered illegal by any other term. But a lot of these trophy hunting places in Africa, and a lot of the entities that you have to go through in Africa, while again, some are obviously bad, a lot of them, they'll send you, like you said, they'll send you to kill a sick animal.
Yeah, it's older,
or old and aggressive animal.
It's not a helpless. It's not a helpless little creature or a young animal. They'll tell you this animal is a nuisance to this village. They are at maximum capacity in terms of age. And having them live more, it just would not be a higher quality of life. The animal's already reached its term in life. I know that's terrible. I hope the standard isn't applied to humans, but don't think you can apply the standard to humans. I think they're two very different things. But with older animal like this, you want to, I think for longevity's sake, for their health and their well-being, and the herd as well. Because aggressive animals, and I'll let you finish your point. I just wanted to make this interjection. But when there are overly aggressive animals, they're going to prey on other animals in their species. And this also helps them too. It's not just about feeding villages or pumping back conservation money. It's about ensuring that the herd is healthy too, and that the overly aggressive animals that pose a danger not only to humans, but also to others in their species are properly taken care of.
And I'm glad you made that point, because that's exactly what I was going to say, is a lot of the money, when it goes through these good entities that trophy hunters will pay to these entities, often goes back into the villages and goes back into conservation efforts. So that's just why when I hear people ripping on trophy hunting and big game hunting wholesale, I'm like, well, you don't really know what you're talking about.
That's true. And a lot of them say that they're the best arbiters of wildlife and conservation, but their money doesn't match their words. Their input, they love to free ride off of people who are actually putting their money towards conservation efforts. And as I think I talked about before in the last episode I appeared on, In North America alone, hunters and anglers pump about 60% and supply 60% of conservation funding through their excise taxes, their licenses, rifles, handguns, fishing tackle, fishing licenses, archery bows. So they do play a big role. They may not be active like a lot of these environmentalists tend to be, but I think more people are having boots on the ground who are hunters and anglers to go into the field to see, to restore habitat and do this. And I think because they know the facts and they know that they contribute greatly to conservation efforts, they're starting to have a say. They're starting to dictate conversation. They're starting to define the narrative. They're showing people that they lead on these efforts through very limited government means or even through private means. They're helping restore species like the Rocky Mountain elk in eastern United States, or they're helping to restore duck habitat or sage grouse habitat, things of that sort. So hunters and anglers are doing a lot for the environment and for conservation. They don't get their due. And even the more controversial big game species that are targeted or harvested or culled, again, all that money goes back to regenerating the species and helping them. It's not just to wipe them out or just to kill Bambi or just to kill Baloo or whoever. It does have a greater purpose, and that's how all these symbiotic relationships work, and how wildlife conservation has been set up. It's to regenerate the species, to ensure human wildlife conflicts are reduced, and just to see that cycle continue with the proper management system in place.
And with that being said, I think we've perfectly run out of time today.
Excellent.
So, Gabriella, thank you so much again for coming on. This episode was just as good, if not better than the last one. And I always love talking.
Oh, you're too sweet. And if you guys need any links, please let me know. I have a really good episode tomorrow with Stephen Gutowski on District of Conservation. He is the Washington Free Beacon's firearms reporter. I think it'll do really well, and it would be really great if you guys could listen to it, because he is doing a lot to dissect the problem with media bias when it comes to firearms, and he is a really valuable voice. So I hope people check that out, and make sure to follow me on social media if you guys aren't already connected already, and I can answer any questions you may have about fishing, hunting, conservation, laws, etc., and the culture that surrounds these activities too.
Where can people find you on social media, by the way?
Absolutely. People can connect with me on Instagram at Gabriella_Hoffman. I'm on Twitter at Gabby_Hoffman. I have a blue check mark, so you can find me there. I'm also on Facebook. I have both a private and public account. So if you Google my name, you'll see my headshot. You can follow there, because I think I'm at the 5,000 limit on my personal, and I try to keep that for people I know or work with. So follow my public page if you type in the Gabby Hoffman as the keyword, you'll easily find me there, and just like the page and shoot me a message. I'll do my best to respond to you. Again, I have District of Conservation as my podcast. You guys can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Anchor.fm, and find it there. A lot of your writers, actually, I think I got like 4 or 5 new reviews thanks to a lot of your contributors. So thank you guys for whoever did that. I really appreciate it. That was much too kind. You could also check out my business website, which is GabriellaHoffman.com. I will be speaking at a college campus next week. I won't reveal where yet because I'm still waiting for the student to confirm with me, but I'm doing a panel discussion on how hunting promotes conservation in a pretty big state school. So when I have those details, I will send that out to you there. But people can request me to speak at their campuses, to their Republican conservative groups, or hunting related groups on campus. I just have an honorarium and travel expenses, but my rates are pretty fair. So if you want to bring me to your campus in the fall, I would love to come talk about this topic and the outdoors and how conservatives can remedy the problem with not having an equal footing in it. That's something I like to do to conservative Republican audiences. And I talk to mainstream audiences too, but I really want to get our side plugged in with what's going on in what's pulsating in the conservation space. Getting people to think more along the lines that they can be contributing something to the environmental movement, and trying to get people away from the radical environmentalism and more towards free market environmentalism or true stewardship, and seeing a balance between natural resources, use, wildlife, free enterprise, things of that sort. So I try to help conservative audiences think in that vein, and I want to do whatever little part I can do to help bring back some balance into the environmental and conservation discussion. Because like I said, hunters and anglers tend to vote Republican and be Republican by a pretty overwhelming amount. There are a lot of centrists and Democrats who hunt and fish too, but the bulk of active participants tend to vote and think our way. And so they need to have a vested interest in trying to dominate or lead the conversation better. And we can when we have the proper tools in place. So I want to help anyone in any way possible lead in that respect. If they have any questions, I coach and consult people to do this too through media and general branding services too.
All right. Well, guys, make sure to go listen to the District of Conservation podcast. Like I said the last episode, it's amazing. Leave it a 5-star review. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And by the way, make sure you leave a 5-star review.
I was going to do that too. I wasn't going to finish without saying, I'm not saying this simply because I'm a guest, but you run a very good podcast, Eric, and I hope people also leave you the proper reviews and the follows and the subscriptions.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And like I said, if you're ever in DC, hit me up and we will do some coffee or lunch because it'd be good to meet you too.
Let's do it. I should be in DC this summer, actually, but we'll talk more after the podcast. Gabby, thank you
You're
so much.
You're most welcome. Happy to come on again.
And until next episode, guys, we should be, I was waiting to announce this, but we should be having Cabot Phillips on in about a week. And possibly, we're still waiting for a final confirmation, Antonia Okafor. So, Okafor. I always mispronounce her last name. She's going to kill me when she comes on here. So, until next week, guys, have a good one. And actually, I'll see you